Paralyzed by Possibilities: How to get to grips with artificial intelligence and why absorptive capacity matters in our innovation strategy. We grow through what we know. Put simply, that's at the heart of the innovation equation. Innovation, creating value from ideas, commercial or social. It's a journey, but it starts with an input of knowledge. Whether we're a startup growing from a flash of insight in the shower or a glimpse of gold from the laboratory, we're building on knowledge. And if we're a giant corporation with a formal R&D empire, thousands of men and women in white coats beavering away in front of screens or amongst gleaming glassware, it's the same story. Knowledge opening up possibilities. And it's not confined to the commercial world. These days, public sector agencies and not-for-profit NGOs are just as keen on finding ways to grow their impact and efficiency through applying new knowledge, innovation. And it's not just technology. Innovation's about knowledge spaghetti, weaving many different strands together to create value. So we can grow through new knowledge about markets, about different needs, about new regulations, which open up different pathways and close down others. But wherever we look, new knowledge creates opportunities. But where do we get that knowledge from? We can try to do it all ourselves, investing in knowledge creation through various forms of research. Now, that model served us well in the past. Many of the things that we take for granted today can trace their origins back to the giant research laboratories set up 100 or more years ago by far-sighted companies and the odd government or two. Think of a world without the big corporate labs like those founded by Bell, Philips, Xerox, or the big pharma companies, and you'd have to remove mobile phones, information technology, blockbuster drugs, and our daily fix of audio-visual entertainment from the mix. But do-it-yourself knowledge creation has several limitations. It's expensive, time-consuming, and it risks becoming self-referential. We eventually end up exploring around what we know, losing the chance of breakthrough innovation. It's also a wasted opportunity if we fail to look outside for new knowledge. As Bill Joy of Sun Microsystems memorably put it, not all the smart people work for you. No organization can cover all the bases. And in a world where we're spending around $2 trillion every year on research and development around the world, we'd be crazy to believe otherwise. We need to look outside for new knowledge to bring into the party. And the whole story of the open innovation revolution is one of learning to manage these knowledge flows into and out from our organization. The game shifts from knowledge creation to knowledge trading, working out new ways to find and access new external knowledge. It levels the playing field. Now, small can be beautiful, as long as the small enterprise in question is connected. Knowledge networking is the key, and we've spent the last 25 years, ever since the publication of Henry Chesborough's book that gave us a label for it, we spent those 25 years trying to work out how we do open innovation. Now, there are plenty of different roads, but they all lead to the same destination. New external knowledge could come from a think tank informing the public sector about novel approaches. Or it could be user innovators coming up with prototypes for social innovations. Or we could watch and learn from our competitors. Or we could mine patent databases for new insights. Or use recombinant innovation, borrowing ideas from other worlds. Plenty of sources. And making use of external knowledge, drawing in something new to meld with what we already have, lies at the core of innovation strategy. We grow through what we know. But all of this rich opportunity depends on a key question. How can we access and deploy that new knowledge from outside? Spoiler alert, it's not simply a matter of going out shopping. History is full of examples of attempts to bring in new knowledge which haven't succeeded. The idea of technology transfer, bringing in new knowledge embodied in physical equipment, is behind a great deal of thinking about how to help organizations develop their capabilities. But technology transfer often fails. Expensive investments of time and money are wasted by firms trying to take on new technology which they don't know how to use effectively, or for which they are unprepared, lacking, for example, key skills to operate it effectively. It's hard enough with established technologies where the problem is one of transferring the soft knowledge around how to make good use of them. But it gets really problematic when we have a new technological wave. Now, this kind of thing can have an enormous general potential, but unless we can find specific applications and then configure them to work for us, the revolution gets stopped in its tracks. We saw this 50 years ago with the wave of change around the microelectronics revolution, where the widespread availability of microprocessors meant we had a solution looking for a problem. We could hook up intelligent control to anything we wanted. The problem wasn't on the supply side. The game-changing potential was certainly there. It was on the demand side, in organizations who didn't know how to apply this technology effectively. A decade or so later, and the internet revolution was in full swing, except that the bubble there also burst because the potential of the technology wasn't being realized, once again, through an inability to assimilate and deploy it to create value. And we're facing the same challenge once again with artificial intelligence, AI. It certainly isn't a problem of availability of the technology. Each week we see newcomers to the marketplace offering their solutions. And with the recent arrival of DeepSeek, we're now looking at the cost of entry coming down. Quite possibly its arrival as a low-cost, open-source approach will herald many more players entering the field, swarming into the marketplace, and making our job a whole lot more difficult. Even if we press the pause button now, we'd still need a long time to take up the application potential, even without any further technological advance. And survey after survey confirms this. It's not that organizations aren't aware of AI and its huge potential, it's just that they don't yet know what to do with it. Where are the specific use cases or reference examples? What's the underlying AI strategy for digital transformation, and where does it start happening? So it's not automatic. Being able to grow through acquiring and using external knowledge isn't a simple matter of going out shopping. And even if we do bring home some bright, shiny new piece of technology, it's not plug and play. Instead, it depends on organizations having the ability to recognize the value of new external information, assimilate it, and apply it to commercial ends, creating value from that knowledge. Now, the good news is that we've known about this problem for a long time. The ability referred to a moment ago is what two researchers, Cohen and Leventhal, talked about in a very influential paper way back in 1990. And they termed this ability absorptive capacity. Now, having given it a neat label, you might expect that the next stage in the process would be for researchers and practitioners to put some flesh on the bones and identify just what organizations needed to do to build absorptive capacity. Unfortunately, whilst the initial question was elegantly framed, a sort of academic fog has grown up around the term, with many competing and sometimes conflicting definitions and a lot of discussion about what absorptive capacity is rather than how to do it. Great conference fodder, but not so useful in answering the big question, so what do I do on Monday morning? One notable exception to this was the work of another couple of researchers, Zara and George, who suggested that absorptive capacity wasn't a single thing, but actually a series of linked behaviours. Whilst there might be great potential in new knowledge out there, realising that potential would depend on pulling off 4 key tricks. First, identifying what's out there and what's relevant to us. And then acquiring it in a configuration which suits our needs, assimilating it, making sense of it in our context, and finally deploying it in ways which create value. And their work still provides us with a helpful framework for beginning to address this question of making use of external knowledge effectively. Think again about our AI example, and we can see these challenges playing out. First, the challenge of identifying. Knowing that there's something of potential value out there is the easy part, not least because of the attention-grabbing headlines that we're presented with every day. But this can paralyse us. We're so busy looking that we can't always see the wood for the trees. Where do we start and what's relevant in all of this for us? Now, one of the early messages from work on absorptive capacity is that we need to be able to make sense of the incoming information to know whether and how it might be useful to us. In other words, we already need to have some knowledge from doing our own research and experimenting to be able to make sense of what else is out there that we might use. Now, we might take a useful lesson from history here, which supports this. During the early days of that microelectronics revolution way back in the 1980s, a similar problem presented itself. Whilst there was enormous potential in the technology, firms were slow to adopt and deploy the new knowledge. And for government, this was seen as an important national issue. Improving the competitiveness of industry would depend on accelerating adoption and helping firms to grow, and yet they seemed reluctant or unable to do so. To help deal with this challenge in the UK and to accelerate adoption, a new policy approach was tried, which combined financial incentives with an attempt to deal with this absorptive capacity challenge. They offered to subsidise the cost of feasibility studies to enable firms to explore and learn about the technology without having to make a final and often expensive commitment. Now, this not only allowed the early stage experimentation, but also connected firms with external consultants who could help them explore, all of it at the government's expense. In effect, it created a temporary research and development capability around exploring and assessing the possibilities, which led to a marked increase in exploration and adoption. It solved one of the oldest challenges around taking on new knowledge. It's risky because it's uncertain and new, so we need to experiment and find out before we commit. Now, the experimental approach in identifying also helps in the next stage of the absorptive capacity challenge, how to get hold of the right configuration of new knowledge. It's emphatically not simply shopping. Instead, it involves an interplay between the context and the offer. It's applying the core principles of agile innovation, experimenting, evaluating before pivoting closer to a solution which works in a particular context, for which you need to be working on a specific use case, not a general aspiration. Remember, AI is almost free to try at present, and it already embodies considerable expertise which can be configured to deal with many challenges. Now, estimates suggest, for example, that the price for developers to access OpenAI's GPT-4 model from within their own applications has fallen by more than 99% over the last 18 months. And with the arrival of AI agents, we're likely to see even more capability to link AI to particular tasks. What's needed is the willingness and the commitment of organizational time and people to experiment, explore what's possible, play around with use cases, and co-evolve relevant configurations through that learning process. Now that's the advice which Ethan Mollick offers at the end of his excellent book, which gives an overview of the AI challenge. If we want to develop co-intelligence, as he calls it, then we need to start by getting our hands dirty and experimenting with it. Or the challenge of assimilation. Now this is perhaps the biggest one in absorptive capacity. How do we blend what we're learning about the new technology with what we already know? It's a challenge of learning new things, but it's also about letting go of old approaches, the way we've always done things around here. We may need the ability to reframe, and that may bring us into confrontation with considerable resistance to change. AI poses some fundamental challenges which will force organizations to rethink their core strengths and capabilities at a strategic level. As an example, recent research by Frank Piller and colleagues suggests that universities as knowledge businesses are going to be transformed by AI. And so they should look to what capabilities they can bring to complement this new knowledge. And this might be, for example, by presenting themselves as trusted curators of knowledge. Now that's something which confronts one of the major limitations of AI at the moment, our ability, our concern about being able to trust what it tells us. Now, thinking about brand values in this way is not necessarily the stuff of discussion in university senates or boardrooms, but it probably needs to be in the future. And another assimilation challenge emerges because we may well have legacy systems in place which need to be worked around. We may not be able simply to replace the old with the new, especially in the areas of critical infrastructure underpinning services like banking. As Alan Brown points out in his critique of the UK government's AI strategy, the problem isn't just legacy technology and systems, there is also the problem of legacy mindsets. So, once again, we have a need for experiment and agile development, getting the best fit between technological possibilities and user acceptance. A relevant metaphor might be that of new clothes. Rather than going out shopping and buying something off the peg, hoping it might fit, we need to think about a custom-tailored outfit, co-created with extensive interaction to produce something which really works. And the last piece of the puzzle is all about deployment. It's not just new product or process development, it's about storytelling. Promoting adoption and diffusion of what may be a radically different offering or different ways of working, which, once again, as we know, will involve close interaction with the market, adapting and pivoting in a shared learning process, evolving, co-evolving the story. Now, AI might appear somewhat daunting. There are almost too many possibilities out there, and new ones are arriving at an overwhelming pace. And the risk is that we become paralyzed by possibilities. What we've learned about absorptive capacity is it's not about filling an empty vessel up with something new from outside. It starts from having some prior knowledge which we can use to help us explore those new possibilities, something which allows us to experiment and learn. So maybe the recipe for success will be around agile innovation, learning by doing.